Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me, Dorothea, through an Orthodox Christian lens. This video is going to be pretty long. There's many things I need to share. I'm going to start by saying I'm going to be ruffling feathers on this, and I'm just judging my comments I'm seeing under my posts. This is not going to be something they're going to like. Some people aren't going to like what I have to say here. But this is what I've come to in my time, my discoveries, my epiphanies, my life story, and what's happened with me and the people around me. And so I'm going to share that. For protection of this channel, I'm just going to start using some different words for things. So for the JEWS, I'm going to use J's. And then for the ISRAEL or ISRAELIS, I'm going to use Izzy's. So just remember J's and Izzy's, okay? Much to share, so I'm going to start with just some of the stories. I'm not going to read a lot of it because, as you know, anything regarding Gaza is very hard for me to talk about because it's just heartbreaking, devastating, inhumane, all the words you can think of that are horrific. That's what this is. And so I'm just going to give you a few headlines, maybe read a couple lines out of it just to give you an idea if you haven't heard what's going on. And then I'm going to get into more stuff. Okay, so Israel assassinates entire Al Jazeera crew ahead of Gaza City occupation. I'm sure you all have heard this by now. It's terrible. I believe, it's 200 and something journalists have been murdered in Gaza since this assault on the Gazan people, the civilians, by Izzy's after the October 7th attack. Okay, so there of course under here you'll see Anas al-Sharif, the main guy that was a great reporter from Al Jazeera, accused by Tel Aviv of being a Hamas operative, was killed alongside 5 of his colleagues in a strike on their tent in Gaza City. I'm going to speak something very controversial. The Izzies use Hamas as a scapegoat for everything regarding attacks, murders, bombings, everything. That's how I see it. It's what I've looked at throughout the years. Not just, I'm talking over the past 20, 30 years, and it's gone on longer. Look up the history. Watch Kim Iverson's video on why the Queen of England hated Izzy's because of what they did to the British. Understand this. Understand how that Izzy state came to be, and what happened from the beginning on to those around and on that land. Okay, it's very important. Now, we all know this happened. It was terrible. Here are the ones that were in the staff that were lost. They were murdered. I'm going to also add to that Izzy killed journalists to commit major massacre without sound image in Gaza. Hospital director saying this. Okay. Now, I'm going to just read his quotes. It wants to kill and displace the largest number of Palestinians in Gaza City, but this time in the absence of the voice of these particular journalists and all satellite channels. Yes, the more you can cut out any satellite channels, any reporting, any video, any words getting out from Gaza, then no one will see those crimes, even though they've already been going on for many years. Like during World War II, we didn't see the Nazi camps. They were found when parts of land areas were liberated by the Allies. This is different nowadays. So we have that. And so I think that's a very, very valid point that this hospital director makes. Now, some people are like, I have to tell you, like I've said, I believe that the Prime Minister and his political party with Ben-Gvir and Schmolzitz and all that are doing they are tools of the evil one, and they're doing terrible, are behind it, and they say this out loud. It's not like they're doing this in secret, but they are doing the will of the evil one, whether they know it or not. In my case, what I'm thinking is they don't know it, obviously. I mean, that's how I see it. But the point is, let's just understand that is evil. And people who still want to defend this government or what they're doing and think it's okay are also being deceived by the evil one. Understand that. It's how I see it all. This is my view through my Orthodox Christian lens. Some people are going to disagree with me. That's fine. But when you see mass murder on a mass scale in front of you, how you can deny that is one that is willfully ignorant, doing it on purpose, or is really okay with that. That's how I see it. Now, also, there are some reports. People say that that it's a conspiracy theory if you say that Hamas, that the Prime Minister Netanyahu propped up or helped Hamas. There's a reason why that was done. I don't know if anybody understands this, because Netanyahu never wanted, and especially in his party, this extreme Izzy party, never wanted to make a peace deal with the Palestinians. They never wanted the Palestinians to have their own state. They have a superiority complex where they believe they belong there and everybody else should be out. That's just the way it is. That's the the extremist Izzy's ideology and agenda. And also, of course, the greater Izzy, okay, of areas they want to expand in, which we are seeing happening. And as you saw from that report from the Izzy soldier, that the stand down on October 7th, they wanted this so that they had an excuse to go more forward, more aggressive, more fast, to obliterate all these areas of these people and to expand across Lebanon, Syria, even parts of Egypt, even parts of Iraq. And of course, that's why they're so against Iran, because Iran is the last bastion in this region that has any power to stop that. However, I do have to say it's sad that most Arab nations are not doing enough. Really, I do think that one of them, I mean, Egypt could do this, but they won't. Could just go in there with their army and stop this. Because Egypt does have a good army. And so do the Turks. They could do that too, but they're all talk. They're not doing anything. And history is not going to be looking nicely at anybody who has not cared about this issue. It's terrible. So as I said, I'm going to show you a couple of... Okay, so first I'm going to show you this one from 972 magazine, which people think is BS. I'm going to show you it anyway. Now it's not letting me do anything. Okay. Sabotaging Oslo to funneling Qatari cash into Gaza. Bibi has spent his career bolstering Hamas to help perpetuate the conflict. He's still advancing the same strategy. Let me see what's going on here. Okay. So that one I couldn't get into, but this one is from the Times of Israel. It was out October 8th, 2023. Okay. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. The premier's policy of treating the terror group as a partner at the expense of Abbas and Palestinian statehood has resulted in wounds that will take Israel years to heal from. That's what she's saying. So, for years, the various government led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. Exactly what I said. And you see it here. So thus, amid this bid to impair Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organization with which Israel held indirect negotiations via Egypt. Let's see why Egypt is not helping. And one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad. Hamas was also included in discussions about increasing the number of work permits Israel granted to Gazan laborers, which kept money flowing into Gaza, meaning food for families and the ability to purchase basic products. So, this... So, anyway, this has been going on a long time, okay? So, she goes into all that. Most of the time, Izzy policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Think about that. The far-right MK Bezalel Smotrich, now the finance minister in the hardline government and leader of the religious Zionism party, said so himself in 2015. So, these extremists do have their ideology and their agenda. So, let's remember that, okay? Because I'm not saying all J's are bad or all Izzies are horrible. I'm saying these extremists are. And so let's go on to what George Galloway asked Larry Johnson the other day. Let's see if I can find which one that was. Okay, here it is.
You have some pretty peculiar high officials. The third most important man in the state is the Speaker of the House. Where did he go for his vacation? Where was he pictured on his vacation? Telling us all that Scripture requires us to stand up for Netanyahu's crimes and to stand with Israel, whatever. He goes to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. Larry, I'm sure you know this. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is 100 yards away from the Wailing Wall. Why do these people never go? They say they're Christians. Why don't they ever get pictured at the stone where Jesus was anointed? Why have they got to head? They called the house to an early, premature summer vacation and then shot off Randy Fine and Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. And there he is with the skull cap on and his hand on the wall and promising eternal devotion. What's wrong with these people, Larry?
Yes, what's wrong with them is they have been deceived and are following a false doctrine, which I've said with the dispensationalism, with this idea of what has to happen with the Jays and the end times and all that. It's a distorted view. Now, there's three things that could be. It's out of ignorance. They're just completely just deceived. Or they're pseudo-Christians. I mean, it's just one of those. I'm now going to get into, and by the way, yeah, the Holy Sepulchre, that's a main holy site for Christians around the world. And instead of going to the holy sites of where Christ walked in the Holy Land, they choose to go to the Wailing Wall. Why? Well, that's my view on the three reasons. Okay, so I'm going to now show you part of, it's going to be a few pieces, so it's going to take a little bit, but I want to share it with you. Okay, I'm just going to start it here. You need to watch the whole thing if you haven't seen it, because it's vital information for a lot of people. But I'm going to start here. I'm just going to show you clips, and I'll put the link below this video so that you can go to it if you haven't already. Mother Agapia. She is Agapia, something like that. I can't say it exactly right, but I think it's Agapia. She's an Orthodox nun, an abbess, okay? And she's sharing what she saw living in the Holy Land. And as I've told you before, it's the same thing I heard in person by Dr. Maria Curry, Greek Orthodox lady who married a Palestinian Orthodox man. They live in the town of Taipei. I don't know if she's gone back. She fled during the October 7th thing, after the October 7th thing, and our church, the St. Porphyrios Church, was bombed by the Izzies. She left. I don't know if she took her kids with her or not. The point is, they might have been old enough by now that they went on their own. I've also heard this from our chanter, our Palestinian chanter in our Greek Orthodox Church. Before he passed a couple years ago, or a year ago by now, I can't remember the exact date, but he told me, we sat down one day and he told me about what happened to him and his brother in Ramallah. And this is in the early 1990s. So this is not something new. It's been going on for decades. So let's go.
Islamic terror.
Because I don't think it's Islamic terror that's taking place in the first place. I think we have to disabuse ourselves of that notion that this is a battle between Muslim and Jew. Or that, constantly you heard after the October event was that Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Even to this day we hear it's Hamas,
Yes.
Hamas, Hamas. What is Hamas? Hamas are people who have had their homes taken from them, who, if they live in Gaza, have not been basically been in an open-air prison for certainly the last 20 years going on. Even when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, they didn't leave open borders. There was no freedom for people in Gaza to develop their economy. If I know people who wanted to try to go to school in America and couldn't get out of Gaza, had a Fulbright scholarship and weren't able to leave.
You mean couldn't get out?
Israel didn't give her permission. So what kind of freedom is that if you live in Gaza?
They couldn't even fly out?
No. And their airport had been bombed in 2000 and early on. 2000, there was an airport built soon after the Oslo Accords. But Israel has intervened many times in Gaza and little by little destroyed. When I first went there in 2002, after the Second Intifada started, I remember saying to my mother back home, this is genocide, even that genocide by Chinese water torture. But now we're seeing genocide on steroids.
You're American, I should say.
Yes, I'm born in America. Yeah, lived in America. And so getting back to Hamas, so also the school I was at has 350 girls. It's in a town that's 98% Muslim. Though it has roots, it's the roots of where Bethany, where on our school grounds is a stone from the 6th century. This is where Christ met Martha at the resurrection. So we're talking about, and it's the road leading. There's still part of the road that existed when Christ walked during that time and would have seen Lazarus and Martha and Mary. Lazarus's tomb is down the road, right? And so permeated even with Palestinian Muslim culture is the sense that Christians lived here, and they recognize Jesus as a prophet, so they respect him and so there's. I'm not saying that everything is perfect. You can't have divisions between, just like even with Christians. Some Christians might think we should have allow politics to be in the church or legislate Christian morality. And others would think totally different. So you can have sort of differences of opinion, if you will, and we can all live with each other between that. So with Muslim and Christian, they can have their differences. But overall, the Palestinian culture is infused with both there.
So you were a nun in a majority Muslim town, a Christian nun,
yep.
In your habit, I assume.
Mm-hmm. And which also was to an advantage because pious Muslims are not jihadists, the ones that I know. I'm not saying other parts of the world that may be the case, but in Palestine, it's simply not the case, or Syria or Lebanon or Iraq. The Muslims there, for the most part, are, they've all grown up together, the Christians and the Muslims, and there's a certain amount of commonality and respect. And so me being dressed like this was just like many of the women there, right? So they kind of respected that. There's the same sort of conservative culture. There's the same sort of idea that we're both have some same basic values of compassion for our neighbor, of taking care of our families, and trying to live. They have their form of fasting and almsgiving, and it's actually very important to them. And I think the best parts of Islam come from its development from Christian ideas that Muhammad came to know. I'm sure of that. You can sense it.
This is a very different story from the one that we're told in the American media, that Christians are imperiled by Muslims in the Middle East.
They are not imperiled by Muslims in Palestine. That is an absolute fact. And that's just simply not the case. And again, going back to my school, in our school, we had icons, which are part of the Orthodox tradition, pictures of saints, and crosses in every classroom. No problem with that. I could show you a photograph, I can't now, but of the graduates of the latest high school graduation. And, they're embracing the nuns there. They're dressed actually in a more secular way. And, it all
So a lot of
together.
your students were Muslim?
98%. The only Christian
of your students were
Yes,
Muslims?
yeah. And about half the teachers during the time I was there, some Muslim, some Christian.
In a Christian school?
Yes, and actually that's all throughout Palestine. The Orthodox is relatively small. We do have schools in many of the Palestinian towns, but also Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, and most of the population, most of the students are Muslims.
Okay, that's the first part. So you can kind of understand what it's like within Palestine. I mean, really, she gets into a lot of stuff, but I don't have the time to show you everything. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to another section that I wanted to play.
Why do American Christian churches send money to a government that does this to Christians?
Well, I think the ones that send money that support the settlements are obviously the Christian Zionists. There's an organization called Christians United for Israel, Pastor John Hagee. I was in Washington a few weeks ago because, they had a conference in Baltimore. So it's slowly growing an awareness by other Christians in America that just like many Jews are protesting and saying, not in our name, and the Jewish Voice for Peace, there has to be much more done by the Christians in America, because these Christian Zionists are speaking in our name. Someone like Senator Cruz, is saying and doing what he's doing because he's following a Christianity that is not the Christianity of the Holy Land. It's not the Christianity of a Catholic or an Orthodox or a traditional Christian. It's a heretical belief.
What is Christian Zionism?
Mm-hmm. As far as I understand it, they believe in the idea of the rapture. They believe that it's sort of this cruel bargain they have going with Israel, because basically what they say, that they're going to be swooped up into heaven, right? And then there's going to be a 1,000-year kingdom, and then there'll be the end of the world and the judgment by Christ, and he'll come back. This is a false. It was condemned as a heresy in 381, because basically there is no 1,000-year millennium to come, no 1,000-year period. The end we are in that time period now, and so it's a false belief there. And
so basically what they're arguing is that Jesus coming the first time wasn't enough.
Ooh, boy, I tell you, I have to comment on that. Wow. What Tucker says there, that is really, boy, does that hit. Because that really says, what does it say to you? It really says a lot to me that, not good enough. Wow, okay.
Yeah, and it's like, in a way, it's denying the Messiah. As an Orthodox Christian, the most important thing in my life is that we receive the body and blood of Christ. And we prepare ourselves to receive that body, because Christ came as God and as man. And if you read John, it's actually 6:66, first he says, "Take, eat, this is my body, and drink, this is my blood." And many people that heard the saying and found it to be a hard saying and turned away from him.
Yes.
So everybody was Jewish then, right? But
again, this is an important portion just for theological purposes that I want to add from my Orthodox perspective. Yes, people forget that when Christ said, "This is my body, this is my blood," it scared away many, because in the Jewish tradition, you were not allowed to drink the blood of any animals, of anything. Okay? But he's the replacement of those animal sacrifices. And those people didn't understand. Their fear took their faculties away of thinking correctly, because they were afraid they thought it was cannibalism. And that's why people say, oh, it's just a symbol. But if it was just a symbol, would they have run off over a symbol? Really? And when Christ speaks that way, it is basically a command. So, let's go on.
Some believed and some didn't. And some continued to follow only the law. And some said, and Christ superseded the law. He said there's something more than that law. I am the law. I fulfill the law and the prophets. We believe in the Feast of the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor. It takes place near Nazareth. I've been there many times. And in our icons, in our images, you see Moses and you see Elijah aside Jesus, because the law and the prophets have been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. He came and said, I'm the church, I'm your salvation. And what I think often about is where I lived in Mount of Olives, St. Mary Magdalene Convent. Right above it is a Catholic monastery called Dominus Flavit. Christ wept. It's where Christ wept. And I think of it often now because, to some degree with Muslims, to a lesser degree, because they retain some of the Christian sensibility, but he's weeping over the people that didn't see him, that didn't understand who he was. And so they follow only the law, and I think that's why you see these are people that can somehow justify allowing for the starvation and ethnic cleansing of so many people, because think of the stories from the Gospels, where Christ heals the man with the withered hand.
Yes.
And he's looking behind him are the Pharisees, and he's grieved at their hardness of heart, because he was healing, doing a work on the Sabbath day, and that was against the law. And so now these Christians of wrong belief believe that they need to rebuild the temple as part of their plan. So they believe that the current state of Israel, which has nothing to do with the biblical Israel, is needed to be built up so that then somehow they can restore and build that temple, fulfill an obligation of the law, And the price of that, they're willing to forego the compassion that Christ talked about and allow people to be starved and wiped out.
Yeah.
And Christians in America have to understand that you're allowing both people who support the state of Israel, who are Jewish, and those Christians who think they're doing something in the name of Christ when it's far from the name of Christ, and it's actually causing the end of the Christian population in the Holy Land. It's going to be, the numbers have dwindled. Now we're getting to the small thousands. I just received a call the other day. Jacob's Well is in the large city of Nablus, in the center of the West Bank, which has been grievously raids take place all the time, and it's very difficult. But what happened the other day was that a Christian-run factory. In Nablus, there's about 600 families, around 600 Christians, a number of churches, and Jacob's Well, which is a very important site to us. We always go there on a pilgrimage when we can. And their factory, no warning, no permit. First, on June 26th, I believe, the Israeli army came in and confiscated some of the factory equipment. And then 2 weeks later, they came and blew up a big portion of the factory. So how are people supposed to have? They gave no reason. There was no permit. They have They have lawyers. There has been, as far as I know, to this date, no court order, no reason. And the only thing, quickly what popped into my head, because it is a metal-making factory, okay, they must be using it to make weapons, right? These are Christians who have been there for decades, centuries, I think, even the family. And it's a well-known business. All right, and no order was given, and I almost feel a little worried about saying anything because I don't know what the repercussions will be with that family.
Yes, there's that worry there because the West Bank is being battered right now more than it has in all the years before, because there's always been this kind of stuff going on for decades. But now, it's really stepped up because why? They opened the gates. They opened that door post October 7th attack to achieve, they hope, their agenda. However, Orthodox prophecy says that won't happen right now. Christ will intervene.
They have no recourse. Who do they go to?
Where's Ted Cruz in all this? Ted Cruz talks about how he's a Christian. Mike Johnson, as the Speaker of the House, talks about how he's a Christian.
Well,
they talk about it a lot, actually.
I think they have to. We have to. I'm not sure that it can be done by. We have to battle AIPAC and the Christian Zionists by the Christians standing up, say, not in my name. We can't be doing this. So if they're getting money from these organizations, then Christians have to have enough concern to say, I don't want this happening in my name.
No, and to my brothers in Christ.
Right, exactly. And not only it's the real people, the living stones that are there, that keep the churches open, that keep things going, but also for our Christian legacy. You know, we're supposedly a country based on a Judeo-Christian heritage, right? But so where is that Judeo-Christian heritage when you're destroying the very foundations of it? St. Jerome translated the Bible in Bethlehem. The cells where he was at are under the Church of the Nativity. You know, the very roots of our Christian heritage are there, and we're letting it be destroyed. Not physically physically by killing the people, but also there's a wonderful person. When you talk about resistance, this all started with Hamas. So for the most part, I would say they're a resistance movement. They're simply people fighting for their people, trying to protect their land. And I don't know if we want to reach into the area of the whole problem is that it was never defined what Palestine is. You know, the Oslo Accords took place, and then there was nothing to, there was area A, B, and C.
Let me just say, as far as the Hamas issue of why that attack took place on October 7th, 2023, we need to understand that when you've been in a prison, an open-air prison, oppressed state, eventually people, they can't live in this thing. They want to break out, and violence happens. This has happened in everything because it's just human nature, okay? And so, why did Hamas take hostages? Well, they thought that taking some Israelis, they would have some leverage to say, hey, we have some people that are valuable to you, and then maybe we can broker a thing for, some kind of real peace of the deal or something for the rights of Palestinians to have their own state. Okay? That's what this was about. That's why they had those hostages. Now, there are plenty of Palestinian hostages that have been rotting in prison for years over even administrative reasons. There's Christians that are in jail, Palestinian Christians are in jail for administrative purposes. They never were given a reason, okay? It's a lot more gray, a lot more deep than what you see on TV. So, just wanted to put that out there.
And you didn't have a Palestine. So little by little, Israel just keeps taking over the land, like confiscating, building the settlements, adding the checkpoints, and strangling the life of anybody living there. Now I lost my train of thought. I'm going to say.
The state of Israel, is less than 80 years old, but that area is thousands of years old, controlled by various empires, as you've said, and then finally the British up until 1948. During all that time, huge pieces of land were owned by various Christian churches, particularly in Jerusalem. Do they what happened to that? Do they still own that land?
They own the land, but this is where it's sort of the a lesser kind of persecution, is that they use legal means or semi-legal means because you have land that was under the Ottoman Empire, and there might be some documents or certain leases, and they say, well, the lease is up now, we have to renegotiate it, and suddenly the Christians have lost a portion of their land. Or they'll use middlemen and say, and it's sort of acts of deceit, and they end up buying these front companies come and buy off some of the land, and you don't realize that it's going to not Christians or not to Palestinians and being used in another way.
In Jerusalem?
Primarily around Jerusalem and Bethlehem. There's large chunks that have been taken. The Knesset sits on the land owned by the Jerusalem Patriarchate.
What?
Yeah. Well, it was their land. Yeah. And they have a lease. They have a lease for it.
How did they get it?
Well, obviously they allowed them to have that. That was a legal operation that was done, to have that. It's land.
And then you have to question why my patriarchate in Jerusalem allowed that to happen. Was it fear that they wouldn't be able to keep their church and their patriarchate there at all? Or is there something more nefarious going on there? I only say that because there's some prophecies of the end times, the last days, that supposedly the patriarch of Jerusalem at that point in time, when that happens, when the Antichrist comes about, that he will welcome that the Antichrist into that church, that area, to serve the to be there for the divine liturgy. And it turns out that he realizes that it isn't him. This has been said by some saints, including Saint Lawrence. I just actually read watched that today, but it's also in my book I have called Ultimate Things, which is a book on the end times from the Orthodox perspective. So it came to my mind on that. Well, maybe, but you don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying it could be out of fear. They didn't want to lose all of their land. They didn't want to lose their land, so they allowed that. So there's two ways to look at that, right? Or even another one. Maybe you have a different idea.
When you first got there 30 years ago, were there more Christians than there are now?
There were more. I mean, it still has been a relatively small population, in the tens of thousands, I think, in Palestine overall. But it's certainly, I think, the greater degree, and little by little, it's decreased. But it's really getting frightening now, because I think these last 2 years is sort of like almost pushed people over the edge. Mm-hmm. But then you hear of families in communities, like 5 or 10 families that are leaving now, going to Europe, sometimes the U.S. or Canada or Australia. And that's not only Christians, of course. Muslims are a bigger population. Because there are people, if you're raising your child and there's no job opportunities for them, and quite frankly, there's a good likelihood that if you're a teenage boy, that you could get shot. I know a number of kids in Al-Azhar where I was, 14, 15-year-olds who have been shot. And look at the difference in that.
For what?
Supposedly throwing a Molotov cocktail. And now think about when the war started with Ukraine and Russia. I remember a story in the New York Times. It was a huge story celebrating that a beer factory was now generating Molotov cocktails to throw against the Russians. And that was celebrated. In Palestine, hundreds of teenage boys have been killed because Israel will say they were throwing a Molotov cocktail. And I know of one case, he wasn't even, I think he was 12 years old last year. I know a beautiful man, Dr. Salim, who's Muslim, but who used to take care of the nuns at our convent. He lives in Shofat refugee camp, which is part of Jerusalem. They pay Jerusalem taxes, but a wall surrounds them. They're guarded by Israeli soldiers. He tries to run a disability center, but they're constantly being raided, people being detained by the Israelis, and the infrastructure there. If you can tell when you're in Palestine, East Jerusalem versus the West. One has nice sidewalks, good schools. The other is decrepit. Anyway, Dr. Salim, there was a boy at the camp there, 12 years old. It was a Muslim holiday, and he was shot dead. And what they said was he had thrown a Molotov cocktail. He was 200 yards from any soldier, and they shot him dead. But that literally happens every day. I have a young man that we just helped come to America a year and a half ago who lives north of Hebron, a Christian, and his family, he went to school a half hour north in Shepherd's Field. We wanted to bring him to America because he was at that age where you look the wrong way at a soldier and it's possibility of getting shot. He's Christian, but he could be Muslim. It doesn't, the point is that this is what happens to them. So any normal family, they want to stay in their land. It's difficult to immigrate. How are you going to be treated going to another country and have to, pick up your livelihood and leave?
Yes. How are you going to be treated in other countries, especially the U.S., that have been taught that all Palestinians are terrorists? They're going to be looked at as terrorists. Sorry, I have to be blunt, but trust me, from my own experience, that's truth. Okay?
Leave other family members. It's not an easy thing to do, but yeah, it is happening that the population is declining, and the priests are very concerned. I've talked to a number of priests in the West Bank, and they're aware of the situation. So what we're hoping to do, there's sort of a latent movement of Christians that don't have this Christian Zionist perspective. And, the Catholic Church has always done some to support the communities over there, but we haven't done anything politically because ultimately it's not the money that's needed now. It has to be the change that we have to change the support of Israel. Mm-hmm. If you allow the settlements to continue, James Carville, right? He was under Clinton and he came up with a phrase for the campaign, it's the economy, stupid. The problem with Israel and Palestine is not Muslim versus Jew, it's the occupation, stupid. That's really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. And unless we get something where a sovereign Palestinian state where they're granted their freedom is created, and maybe that'll be two states with a boundary, or maybe it'll be some sort of confederation. That's up to the politician to decide. But unless there's freedom and an ability for the Palestinians to develop and be free to have their country, Christians will continue to leave. And what will happen, not only those living stones will leave, but the holy sites, what gives me the greatest pleasure is after I left Jerusalem, I've lived in America, but 2 times a year I bring pilgrims, people who want to come and visit the holy sites, go and see where Jesus Christ was crucified and resurrected, go see where he was born, go up to the Sea of Galilee, be a part of that. And one of our saints says, taking a pilgrimage to the Holy Land is like the 5th gospel. So we can read the Bible all we want, but it's when we go there and really are at the places where our Lord walked and lived and performed his miracles that you really, it deepens your Christianity and your sense of things. In fact, one of the loveliest things is I've taken people of all ages and I'll ask them, younger people at the end of the trip, so what do you like the most? And some people might say the Dead Sea or something, but I've also been struck that 15-year-old boys will come back and tell me it's when we went to the Holy Sepulchre and to the tomb of Christ.
Yes.
So there's obviously something there that's important to our Christian heritage. And what's happening is if the Christians are forced to leave, if Israel takes greater control, what we will have is museums. They won't be living places of prayer. And that will be a great tragedy, not only for the Christians, but I think for the whole world.
Yeah, because they're not owned by government. I mean, these are pre-existing.
Of course, they've been there for centuries.
Exactly.
And they have gone down in up. I mean, there have been times over the centuries where Christians have had difficult times and then rose up again and did. So I think actually we're in one of those dark times. I mean, we could go into a whole explanation of why the world it is. Why do we even allow? This is mind-boggling to me. It's getting painful. I can't look at anything right now. I think a lot of people. Every day, these stories of what is happening and people justifying it. To anyone with a conscience, it's sort of like, what are we doing? And how has this evil been allowed to grow?
Exactly. That's exactly how I feel. So let's go on. I'm just going to skip over to this portion here because it's pretty long.
In Palestine.
Yes, well,
and Israel.
That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Were you there? There was a siege at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, birthplace of Jesus.
Yeah.
Maybe 2002. I remember.
Oh yes, I was there. Yeah. I had. That's where I became especially close to the Palestinian Christian community because in Bethany there aren't that many Christians, but we had teachers from there and students from there, the boarding students. And when the siege happened, it wasn't just a siege on the church itself. What they claimed was that there were some fighters that were in the church, which actually that's a Christian tradition, for people to take refuge in a church. But the Israelis used that as a way to, they besieged the church. But the whole town was under siege, not just the church. So that meant that the teachers who lived in the Bethlehem area couldn't get out of Bethlehem to come over to Bethany. People couldn't get food and medicines. After a while, it became, I would get calls and saying, my neighbor has epilepsy and we cannot get a new medication for her. Can you find a way to get something in, through a care organization into us? And finally, when the siege ended during that time, I remember a doctor telling me describing how someone had been shot in his house, and he was bleeding to death. And he was calling the doctor, what do I do? What can I do? And the doctor literally heard him just bleed to death during that because no ambulance, nothing was allowed. Mercy. And after the 40 days, roughly 40 days, which is ironic.
Yes, that is ironic, but there's a significance to numbers biblically in the scriptures, and I'm going to do a piece on that eventually.
I went in there and I met up with some of the people. Everything was strewn with garbage all over the streets, the bullet holes. What Israel likes to do is destroy. Not only do they control the place, but they almost take glee. And we're not talking about Hamas time. We're not talking about, 2023. We're talking about 2002. Mm-hmm. They would go through the town of Bethlehem and purposely with their tanks, the smaller ones, like knock over the light poles or the things that are garnished with Christmas trees, decorations and things, and knock them over in the middle of town, or pull their bulldozer and smash a car. But again, that same resiliency of the Palestinians, the Samud, I have a photograph. He's actually the father of one of the priests now in Bethlehem. And he's sitting on his car that had been smashed by the Israelis, just with a smile, kind of like, you're not going to stop us. We're going to carry on. You did this to me, but I'm going to carry on.
There were people shot inside the church of the Nativity.
Yeah, the bell ringer there was shot dead. Yeah.
Was he a Christian?
Of course, yeah.
So that was the moment.
And Christians were shot outside the church. I don't know if it was exactly during those 40 days, but a young 16-year-old boy, an altar boy of the church, there were curfews going on. And they had tanks all around the city circling them. And he was out with his 70-year-old cousin, I think it was, and they were just kicking a soccer ball. He was shot dead by a sniper, 16-year-old Johnny Talgia.
Lord have mercy.
You remember his name?
Of course. And also there was another, Christine Saada. Her father was the principal of the Orthodox school in Bet Sahur, Shepherd's Field. They were driving, and the Israeli soldiers that is Area A, right? If you want to talk about the politics of it, technically that means it was under full Palestinian control. They should have their police and everything. No, Israeli jeeps were there, and they mistakenly thought that was a car of some militant. So they shot up the car.
That's what they always say.
His wife was injured. He was injured as well, and his 12-year-old daughter Christine was killed.
Okay, she goes on about all that. I don't have time to do all of this. I just wanted you to hear portions here of what the Christians have been going through. I've known this for a long time. It's very heartbreaking hearing this. There's that portion I wanted to share. You have to realize, and I'm going to get into this after I'm done with this last portion here. Where was that I want to do? I'm going to do one other little area, and then I'm going to talk to you more.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Palestinians themselves.
I would
and their
love to
form of
hear it.
resistance, because I think one of the reasons I was grateful to be able to come on is to really give a picture of them and the people as they are. And one thing that's really struck me, I know Muslims, I know Bedouins, I know all during this time where they've really been suffering, what I really get sense from them is their real belief in God and that their life is in God's hands. And there's such a humility and an obedience to their Creator and an understanding that this life is not the only one. And there's a real beauty to that I think so much of the world is missing. And I think even in it, sort of, there's a deeper sense to all that's even going on right now, right? We're in the heart of Jerusalem, the heart of where Christ came. There was a reason for that. And now we have a situation where the people who were the closest to God are being destroyed. In a simple sense. You know, I live next to the Mount of Olives, and when you go down the Mount of Olives, it's where they said, Hosanna in the highest, here comes Christ. And often I've gone to parish churches in Palestine, and the whole community they know all the service, and they're singing it themselves. And it reminds me, as those people that were on the Mount of Olives, greeting the Creator, greeting the Messiah, who is coming for their salvation, and honoring him. And that's what they're doing to this day. And what we're doing instead is destroying that. And what does that mean for the world when we let that go? The last time I was there, I went through Amman, not through Tel Aviv. So I had to go through the border, and then I spent a night, and in the early morning I was being driven to the airport from Madaba, where there's a mosaic from the 6th century that shows you the places in the Holy Land, the map in Madaba. And Madaba is not a very big city, and as I'm going out of it, you very quickly, before you get to the airport, come to lands that are still being grazed by shepherds. And I started to weep because to me that's so emblematic of what the Lord really wanted us to be like, in touch with the land, recognizing that our life depends on what we grow and what we produce and what we do. And those kind of people are the ones who I hear from now who say, they're suffering. They're literally going to be killed, but they have so much more courage and faith than you find in so much of America. And
Okay, so it makes me want to cry. This let me explain my background. I've done this before, but it was months ago. I'm going to just give you some information. I came to the Orthodox Church. I was baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church when I was 1 year old. I didn't grow up in the church because my dad was a non-practicing he was a non-practicing Christian. He was in the military. He met my mom in Greece. She was from Greek Orthodox. She grew up in the traditions, but she didn't know obviously she wasn't taught all the theology and all that. She just knew what to do in the divine liturgy, to pray, and all that, the basic things, know about the saints' feast days. And in fact, my yaya knew all of them by heart, all the saints' feast days by heart, because in that generation, they were a lot more in tune to their Christian beliefs, and that's just overall with everybody who's Christian at that time. And so I grew up, as I said, in a conservative household, and I came back to the church around I was around 25, 26 years old. There's a long story on that, but you can go watch my video on that of how I came back to the faith. And from the time I was 18, when I started to be able to vote, all the way till my 40s. I was my early 40s, late 30s, early 40s, I believe it was. I was a Republican. I had beliefs that were obviously on the conservative right-wing side. I was pretty hardcore on things, and I 100% supported Izzy. That's the ISRAEL, in case you forgot what I was using as a code. And I just blindly followed that. I also believed, I was a big backer of Bush. I believed in the war on terror. I was totally brainwashed by Fox News 24/7. I didn't think news people lied then. I was pretty gullible and pretty, naive at that time. At the same time that was going on, when I started to change, is I became very involved in my church. I kind of had my own little convert thing going on there, where I was a zealot for a while, and then by 2008, 2009, especially 2009 through 2013, I was very involved in the church. I was teaching Sunday school. I was the director of Sunday school, director of outreach. I was doing all kinds of things, but it took me a year of prayer, asking God to help me, give me the courage and the confidence to do more for Him, because I was quite introverted and all that. And so it took that long, and then I raised my hand in one of the general meetings, and they set me up for the school to help there first as an aide, and then I just took over for the other woman who had a knee surgeon. She was out a lot, and then I just took over. And she was fine with that. She didn't really, it wasn't like she was totally wanting to continue. It's just a small church, and, So once I became really involved, I was doing a lot of reading on the saints. I was doing a lot of stuff, a lot of reading on the scriptures, a lot of reading about the saints and everything, going to the services religiously, so to speak. No pun intended. And so I started to believe, because I had been pretty hardcore, my mind had loosened, and God was able to reveal to me certain things that I believed that, like I was for capital punishment, and then I changed my mind and said, no, I really don't believe in that, because the church really doesn't totally support that. And so I changed on that. I changed on the environment. I had more of a view that, it's just the earth doing things. Then I realized that people do affect the world, and we all know that, because we're stewards of the earth, and that we're supposed to be doing things in good service to God for the plants and animals on this earth, taking care of it, not destroying it. And at some point I realized Izzy was not something to really support, at least their government leaders and all that, and their intelligence agency, all the things that they had done to our military, and to their disregard for Americans, and me being a military child, that really, really angered me at the time when I found that out. I was upset, and I was angry, and I am not one that gets angry easily, and that's not one of my vices, but boy, I was not happy about that. And so I started to learn this, and I realized, and then in 2011 when I met Dr. Maria Curry, she was touring, and Mother Agapia talks about this, that she was around visiting parishes in this. She visited a parish in Boulder where our church parishioners and we went up there to listen to her talk. That's the first time I'd ever heard about Palestine and what was going on there, because I'm telling you, all that time before then, all those years that before I became close to the church, I thought all Palestinians were terrorists. I thought the Middle East was just full of terrorists. Total ignorance. Bought into the whole propaganda on that. And of course, my mother's not crazy about the Turks because of the 400-year oppression and occupation and killing of our patriarchs and, and all that stuff. Yes, I understand that. And I totally get why she feels that way. She's a Greek. That's still in their blood. They still feel that, That was a long time. But as I said in a comment under one of the videos of mine that somebody had made, Turks are not Arabs. Arabs are not Turks. Persians, Iranians are not Turks. They're not even Arab. And so you can't put them all in one box. And I already discussed our Palestinian chanter that we had in our church, that what happened with he and his brother. They were in Ramallah protesting the oppression and the way they, as you can see, how they were treated. You have to understand that was going on all over there. So it was something important to share, and then you can understand where I'm coming from on this, so that it's just not like me no, I started looking into a lot of things. I started to research things. I started to read things. I started to understand through even my Orthodox faith what's going on here. And I felt, I feel bad. I was going against my own brothers and sisters, Orthodox brothers and sisters, thinking everything was fine. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this. I know it's a sticky topic, but it's something that I feel very strongly about because of what happened from my experiences. And so I shared all that with you. Thanks so much. If you made it through the end of this video, thanks so much for watching, for following my channel, for all your support. Until next time.